Welcome to the Equilibrium Frequency Podcast. I am Lavashni Naika, Communication Specialist. Joining me in studio is Paul Nixon, Head of Behavioral Science, and Pat Magadla, Head of Distribution for Equilibrium. We have all been bombarded with the two-pot system, but now that we all know what it is, Pat and Paul will help equip you with the knowledge to be able to have crucial conversations with your clients to prevent them from possibly making a decision that could hurt them in the future. Welcome to the studio, guys. Over to you.
Thank you, Lavashni.
Pat and Paul, like that, huh?
The two P's.
Pat and Paul, yeah.
P squared. It's a great privilege to be sitting here and in conversation with Paul. So let's get right into it. So the two-pot system came into effect in September. And I think as many of us expected, we saw quite significant withdrawals to the tune of billions on a weekly basis. So I think maybe, Paul, just to kick us off, do we have any statistics or understanding of these withdrawals that are being taken by investors, where they're actually going? And I think essentially what I'm getting at is, are these scenarios where people are desperate for the money?
Yes, ideally the idea of the system is kind of sound, right? So there's no point in having, a pot of pension money when, you've been retrenched and you can't put food on the table, but you've got a pension fund, right? So that makes no sense. So I totally get the idea or sentiment behind the system, but if you look at the statistics, it seems to be that the average tax rate is around about 35 or 36% on withdrawals, which kind of indicate that it's not actually perhaps the kind of lower end of the income spectrum who are actually withdrawing the money. And then if you kind of speak to people out in the, speaking to a couple of financial advisors as well, just a quick dipstick, the answers I'm getting are that people are doing this, taking money out for home improvements. They are settling short-term debt like credit cards. So I think we then have to consider that there will be unintended consequences when you have a system like this. The intention is great, but there are a lot of people who are taking the money that don't necessarily need it that much, right?
That's actually quite alarming, Paul, because essentially what's happening is these people that are withdrawing are almost robbing their future self. And you make the point, the principle is sound. If someone is drowning in debt today, they're more inclined not to worry about tomorrow. Is the solution here financial education? Is the reason why we're seeing these vast withdrawals because many South Africans don't truly understand the impact of their decisions?
Yeah, I don't think so. So I think financial education is necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient. And I mean, the simple reason behind that is that if you assume financial education is the solution, then what you're basically saying is that knowledge is the problem. Now, I can tell you right off the bat that a lot of people know what the answer is. They just, that they struggle to bridge their intentions with their actions. So we all want a brighter future. We all want to retire with more money, but we sort of struggle to identify again with that future self you're talking about. And that is actually the issue. So financial education is absolutely necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient in changing people's behavior. And I think that's the main point there, right? There was actually, just before you go on there quickly, Pat, there's an interesting study done by the American Psychology Association on, using financial education to change behavior and then using psychology. And one group of people, they basically gave education, benefits of compound interest, tax benefits from retirement saving, all the good stuff that we hear every day. And they found that the second group who got information on psychology, so how to become more future-oriented and identify with that future self of yours that you were talking about, was 3 times as effective in getting behavioral change.
So, Paul, many of us, despite being aware that certain decisions that we're making are not good for our financial future, yet we still proceed with that decision. Talk us through a bit more on that.
Yes, I think that the important thing here is that we all have internal narratives that we tell ourselves to basically allow us to make poor decisions, right? And a way we can look at this is there's quite a nice example actually of that a psychologist mentions that maybe think of it this way, right? So it's your wedding day and you're kind of standing at the altar and it doesn't matter if you're the bride or the groom, doesn't matter. And you've invited your high school sweetheart to the wedding. You haven't seen each other for many, many years. And you're up there in front of the altar and you're giving your vows. And let's say, for example, you're the groom. You stare out into the crowd and there you make eye contact with your high school sweetheart, right? And at that moment, you're going to be faced with a sense of cognitive dissonance, right? So you have this belief, you've made a choice, your bride is next to you, but you make eye contact with a person you haven't seen, but she was the love of your life, right? So what do you do in that situation? Because it's going to create a painful situation. And that's what they even call like a cognitive toothache, right? So information has now entered your world that challenges your current belief system, right? Which is obviously now you're about to commit to someone for the rest of your life. So what do? You're going to do one of two things. You're either going to build up your bride in your head, like, my current bride, for example, the bride is better looking, she's more successful, or you're going to try and break down the person that you're looking at in the crowd. Like she actually was, we never actually got on that well, and that's basically how we kind of harmonize almost the internal narratives that we have inside of us. So if we relate this to making decisions about savings as well, it's the same process, right? If we know we're making a poor decision, we normally, either what we do is we kind of discard the information, the new information that's come into our worlds, or we tend to just change the way we look at things, right? So if you think about a two-part decision, one of the most popular questions I've had doing these presentations around the country with financial advisors and speaking to their clients is, should I withdraw the money and pay off my credit card? And the easy question, or the obvious answer, is no, you shouldn't, because you're going to be paying tax on that money, right? So you're going to be robbing your future self, as you've mentioned, of that money. But what people tend to do is they try and create narratives that will allow them to make a poor decision that they can kind of live with themselves, right? So if you've got this belief that you're a savvy financial investor, for example, but you know that you're going to pay tax on the money, you might now say, okay, I'm going to pay tax, but I'm going to use it for a good cause, right? I'm going to pay off my credit card. The trap there is that, a couple of months later, a year later, is your credit card still going to stay paid off? Probably not, right? Or maybe not, at least. So the point is that, we tend to create these kind of internal narratives that sometimes allow us to make poor decisions.
So, Paul, you articulated so well the problems and challenges, and it would be remiss of us to just leave it here. I think we need to explore some potential solutions. Are there any possible current or even future trends that are out there that can help us understand our financial selves better and our personality traits? Does such a future exist?
Yeah, that future is already here. I mean, so I think if you look at other places in the world like the US and the UK and Europe, there are financial personality assessments, for example, that help people to uncover or discover more about these factory settings. We've built something in Momentum as well, which is going to be piloted next year, which is basically going to help financial advisors explore these kind of discussions with their clients. And remember as well that psychology is now part of the CFP syllabus as well. So, understanding what's happening, what, the thought process that someone goes through, their relationship with money from childhood. So there's a branch in psychology called imagotherapy, which basically is sort of the idea behind it is that it's called scripts because you carry on replaying the same behaviors that actually come from childhood. So whatever happened to you in childhood, you end up sort of in patterns and you end up in loops, and it's a form of therapy because the idea here is to identify what those loops and patterns are so that you can move away from them, right? So I'll give an example from my own personal circumstance. So, when I was in school, I went to a private school, very, very lucky enough to go there. And, but my parents never had a lot of money. So, kids around me always had a lot more than I did. But my parents used to drop me off at school in this like old beaten up car. The door was kind of like, it's in the movies, like the door was half falling off and, we couldn't get it started often. So I had to and all the kids are there kind of watching, right? And then you've got to open the hood and it's this old, and you've got to I had to sit there with a screwdriver and sort of play with something until it was mortifying, absolutely mortifying. So a lot of the times I used to tell my parents to drop me off at school like a couple of blocks away, right? So, that kind of stayed with me, right? And sort of the financial behavior that came from that was that I always would buy, even though I was staying in like renting a tiny little place, I remember 20 years ago, basically on the back of someone's property, I was driving an Audi, a brand new Audi, right? Because that to me was important. So it was important for me to show success, right? Because I had to change. And so until, every financial advisor I spoke to was like, dude, why are you spending so much? But if you're not going to take the time to identify that pattern or where that pattern comes from, I'm not going to change the behavior. So, if you don't understand or if you're not willing or able to probe into the stories behind what people's behavior is, financial advice is about more than balance sheets, income statements, numbers. It's about how people get to those numbers. And if you can't have that discussion, then you're not going to be able to get behavioral change from someone. And also you're not going to be able to establish that level of connection with that client.
Yeah. That's actually, thank you for sharing that story, Paul, because that's so true. Like we are a product of our experience, especially at that impressionable young age. And as you're talking, I'm just trying to imagine this reality where there are these diagnostic tools that financial advisors can use. Like imagine how much it can reduce financial conflict in marriages.
Yeah.
More importantly, imagine how many marriages could have been saved if people had access to this type of knowledge.
It's about communication, Pat. Sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, I think divorces, and I mean, I'm divorced myself, so I know these things, right? But most of the problem of it's not infidelity, those are symptoms of uncommunicated expectations, right? Divorces happen because people don't tell people stuff, and they don't tell people what they want, and they don't have these discussions about money and values, right? So, in psychology, a very simple exercise. I mean, if you have little post-its, write down the top 3 things that are important to you. Get your wife or husband to do it with you, or partner to do it with you, and put them in rank them. And if your number 1 is equal to your partner's number 3, you're probably going to have conflict, right? Because what's driving your behavior is your value system. So if you're not communicating that with your significant other, they're not going to understand that your career is that important to you, that you're going to be spending evenings, weekends, because that's important to you. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but it's about communicating, because to some partners that's going to be like I don't accept that, right? But some will be supportive. So make sure you have those discussions before you end up, and we talked about the altar, before you get to the altar, right? Because after that, it's too late. Well, it's not too late because there's divorce, right? But you don't want to end up in that situation. So communicate.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're so spot on, because even if you bring this back to financial advisors, the role that they also play to understand what motivates the behavior behind their clients, because most times you can actually be unintentionally judgmental without understanding the story behind that financial decision.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think, we've touched on this where we said financial education is important, but it's not entirely sufficient, that there's something more. What else can be done? Like what else can an advisor utilize that's out there?
Well, I mean, look, so just before we go into the answer there, I mean, there's quite a nice example of that, right? And it's because the right answer is not always right. And that's another reason why financial education, I think, is falls short in many respects. And there's a well-cited example where there's a woman having a chat, a middle-class woman, single mom, having a chat with her financial advisor. It's in the Bronx somewhere. She lives in New York. And, she's having a chat, and basically she wants to use her IRS payment. She's getting a refund or rebate from the IRS. And, that financial advisor's like, well, what are you going to do with this? And she's like, I'm going to buy a flat screen TV, like a big one, right? And of course, the financial advisor jumps in straight away and compound interest. And, we've just done a retirement analysis, and, you're falling so short. And she's like, but hang on a second, I'm doing this because, I live in a dangerous neighborhood, or a little bit of a dangerous neighborhood, and the best way to keep my kids at home at night is for them to watch TV, right? Wow. So you can't say that person is wrong, right? Because the utility that they're getting from that decision is just what they need, right? Yeah. It's sound. It's perfectly sound. It's perfectly rational. So the right answer can be wrong. And if you're a financial advisor and you're going to competitive listen, so you're just going to listen so that you can, sort of spew out information at someone to kind of in a judgmental way almost, you're not going to get behavioral change. Again, why financial education sometimes falls short. So you've got to have context. Everyone's an expert in their own lives. And you have to have context behind someone's situation if you're going to get behavioral change. So to get that to your question, what should you do? There are, again, you're going to have to upskill yourself as a financial advisor. Communication techniques. How do you listen? How do you listen without judging? How do you use principles in psychology to help people focus on the future and not in the present? These are the new age of financial advisors is learning things like this.
Sure. It's been fascinating, Paul. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I think I've taken a lot of learnings from some of the points that you raised. And I think, as advisors listening to us right now, you're probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Like, I have to do reviews. I have to worry about operations in my practice. I have to do the marketing, the recruitment. There's a lot that advisors are juggling on a daily basis. And I think that's part of the beauty of partnering with a discretionary fund manager. Because if you partner with the DFM, we then become your investment management partner. So in the background, you don't have to worry about the fund picking. When it comes to review time, you're showing up more professional, and we've done that for you. And we're actually then freeing you up to actually spend more time with your clients and have these type of conversations. I've learned so much from the insights that you shared. Like, you need to understand what drives the behavior. If you sit there and you tell your client, no, but don't buy the flat screen TV, and she fires you as an advisor, and you don't understand why she's fired you, but because you offended her and you didn't take the time to understand the rationale behind that decision. And that's part of the beauty with you having the right team surrounding you. You're freed up to spend more time understanding your client's behavior and actually growing your practice organically. Sometimes you can actually just grow organically without having to acquire new clients. So thank you, Paul. This has been a good conversation.
Cool. That's a good chat. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you both for your valuable time and insights into the world of retirement and our behavior behind it. You've been listening to the Frequency Podcast by Equilibrium. Thank you for listening.